While history is often a contested political battlefield, perhaps there is no singular historical figure who has been as contested and fought over as Tipu Sultan. Why is he so contentious? Why is he so controversial? He's the subject of a new book by Vikram Sampath. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we look at the contested legacy of Tipu Sultan. For his admirers, he was a symbol of resistance against the British. For his critics, he was out and out a religious bigot who was guilty of unspeakable brutality. Now, a new book by historian and author Dr. Vikram Sampath explores the legacy of Tipu Sultan and tries to move beyond the binaries that have defined him and tries to move beyond the political camps that have either claimed him or rejected him entirely. It isn't easy to do with a subject as inflammatory as that of Tipu Sultan. Remember, there are political parties who openly commemorate him, celebrate him, and there are those who absolutely look at him as a figure of revulsion. History, however, if anything, comes in shades of grey, and Dr. Sampath tries to move beyond politics and camps to explore this legacy in his new book. I want to welcome on the program Vikram Sampath. You've often seen him with us discussing many contentious things for which both he and I get slammed quite often by both the right and the left, but sometimes we get praised by both the right and the left as well, confusing both camps, and that's how it should be. Vikram, welcome. Before we get to the book, you had told your mother while she was alive that you would not explore or publicly talk about Tipu Sultan, at least for as long as she lived. I think our audience needs to understand that story because I think it really brings home the kind of controversy, the kind of polarization that attaches itself to the subject of Tipu Sultan. Why did your mother not want you to speak about Tipu Sultan? You were threatened. What happened?
Thank you, Barkha. Always a pleasure talking to you about yet another contentious issue, as we always indulge in only such conversations.
That's right.
And I often say, ironically, I owe my entire foray into literature, into historiography, thanks to Tipu Sultan. I was a boy of 12 or 13 when that very famous serial was coming on the only channel we all saw those days, Doordarshan, Sword of Tipu Sultan by Sanjay Khan. Yes, who played the lead.
Yes.
And there were lots of controversies around it. The manner in which the royal family of Mysore was shown in a very poor light in that serial. And I come from Karnataka, southern Karnataka, which was the erstwhile Mysore kingdom. And that the Wadiyar dynasty of the Hindu rulers, from whom Hyder and Tipu usurped the throne for 40 years, is a dynasty which is still held in a lot of regard and reverence. In fact, the scion of the family is now the member of parliament also from Mysore and Coorg, Yadubir Wadiyar. So as a boy of 12 or 13, these protests, there were so many stories about some curse of the Wadiyar because of which, the studio had also caught fire and Sanjay Khan had his face, I think, burnt as well. So for a young boy then, it was just, childlike curiosity to know the truth about that one king and queen who were misrepresented in the serial. And that led to a kind of a mad obsession about the history of the place. The Wadiyars ruled for 600 years. And there was not a single book written in the modern times to cover this entire period of their history. And that's how quite serendipitously my first book, Splendors of Royal Mysore, came out way back in 2008. And one section of that book was, of course, about the interregnum, the interval between, normal governance when a usurpation happens. And I was talking about it in Bangalore somewhere, reading out letters, not even adding my interpretation, just verbatim quoting letters that Tipu had written to his officers to conduct, massacres and destruction and all of that. And ruckus broke out in the entire room. The program had to be stopped midway. I think I was just 26 or 27, and I didn't know history is this weaponized. I thought it is something which involves talking the truth about. And someone in the audience, I had to be ushered away, backstage, and someone in the audience also came and thrust a letter in my poor father's hands saying, you have an only son, and if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he speaks. And a few, weeks later, there was another article I wrote in a newspaper which was doing a series on the divans of Mysore. And in that, there was some reference to Tipu in the context of one of his divans, Purnaya. And that led to another huge, protest right in the heart of the city in MG Road, where people, outside the newspaper office, they gathered and they wanted my apology, which I said over my dead body, because I have evidence to show whatever I have spoken about. And so they burnt my effigy, slogans, and for a long period, that burning of the effigy was my, I think, Orkut profile picture or something. Because I said I would care to hoot.
I'm laughing not over the threat, but just because the memory of Orkut made me laugh. Just to clarify, I'm not
Yes.
trying to make light of the threats, but I just
Yeah.
realized how old you and I are, that we remember
Yes,
Orkut. But go
we are
ahead.
dinosaurs.
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously, I think it was the zeal of youth or whatever then that I didn't bother much. But obviously, parents are parents, and particularly my mother, who had very poor health, she really did not want me to fall into trouble, and that is why she made me promise to her that I'll never talk about him in public ever again, because we have no agenda, no political ambitions, aspirations to put ourselves out there for personal harm. So I did keep that promise to her, but as you know, she passed away in 2018. But the book was germinating in my mind all through this, 15, 16 years. And after she left, I think I got the courage to actually revisit the sources once again and zoom into those 40 years, which was just a small section in my earlier book, and give it a larger holistic, portrayal. Also positing Mysore, positing Tipu and his father Hyder in that very, very troubled, disturbing century of the 18th century, which is when India lost her mojo and actually capitulated to the British colonial ambitions.
Now let's start with, and your book actually talks about how you want to try and move beyond the two reductionist sort of narratives. And both narratives seek to deny the other, because Tipu Sultan has been reduced to this kind of political football between both ideological camps. Now, was he a religious bigot? You argue in your book that there is unequivocal evidence in history to show us that he was. Talk about that, because the counter narratives by those who support him, they argue that he made grants to temples, that there were more than 150 temples to which he gave grants, that he based a lot of his work in temple towns, that he gave 10,000 gold coins to one particular temple, that conversions or forced conversions have to be seen in the context of political power, etc. You've heard the counter arguments. Your book establishes him to be a religious bigot, right? And you do say that he was guilty of unspeakable brutality. So let's start there. Why is this also contested?
Yeah, I think he's a historian's enigma, and there are contradictions in his character, and he's a bundle of so many different shades. A lot of it being more black than white, and I base my assessment of his religious policy on four major counts. One is, was there an intent? Was there an intention or ill will towards people who did not belong to his faith? And did he demonstrate it in? Is there proof of this either in his writings or any other method? And in 1786, just 3-4 years after he comes to power, he has a manifesto, a proclamation which says, and I quote, "It is our constant object and sincere intention that those worthless and stiff-necked infidels who have turned aside their heads from obedience to the true believers and who openly raise the standards of infidelity should be chastised by the hands of the faithful." One part of it. And on his very sword, the inscription that is there, it says, "My victorious sabre is lightning for the destruction of the unbelievers. Hyder, the Lord of the faith, is victorious for my advantage. And moreover, he destroyed the wicked race who were unbelievers." So constantly this mention of kafir, unbelievers, and how it's his goal or objective of his kingdom was to, vanquish them, is something that is very evident. It's also evident in the dreams that he had. He was a copious writer, and he used to dream a lot, very vivid dreams. And every morning, I believe, he used to spend 2 hours in his bathroom sitting and actually documenting all that he saw. And several of these were very violent dreams of, some angel, or sometimes the Holy Prophet himself appears in front of him and orders him to go and demolish this or kill somebody and so on the basis of faith. So that was the first, parameter I would judge him by. The second was, were there discriminatory practices towards non-Muslims in his own kingdom? While one may argue there were some Hindus in the, I mean, Diwan Purnaya was also there, that really doesn't make him pro-Hindu, because one could turn the argument and say the British Raj had majority of Indians in their service.
Hmm.
That didn't make the British Raj pro-Indian. Especially after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, which he lost very horribly to Cornwallis, his faith and trust in the Hindu community, particularly the Brahmins, almost completely disappeared. And he began to staff his army, his administration, only and only with Muslims, even if they were illiterate. They did not even have any skill or competence to be in that position, but they were still taken into position. Discriminatory taxes were put, like Muslims were exempt from house tax or taxes on grains, special education only to those who converted to Islam. So these were the second parameter that I talk of. Were
Hmm.
symbols, rituals, and festivals of other faiths, permitted in his kingdom? We don't have much proof of that, because Mysore is famous for the Dasara, where over the 10
Hmm.
days Dasara is celebrated. On the Vijay Dashmi, you have a grand procession and so on. Now you have British soldier eye accounts of how they saw the Dasara procession, but that is almost at the cusp of the reign of Hyder and Tipu. So Hyder was a lot more, accommodating of other faiths. But in the entire 17 years that Tipu ruled, we don't find any such references by any of the British soldiers who were still languishing in the dungeons in Srirangpatna under terrible circumstances, talking about these festivals and so on. And the last parameter that I would say is, was there evidence of iconoclasm or destruction in his reign?
Hmm.
And of that, I have an entire chapter, talking about each and every, kind of destruction that happened, both within Mysore and outside Mysore. In the case of Hyder, it was largely outside Mysore, as you said, as a part of conquest. But even,
Yeah.
Rice, who wrote the Mysore Gazetteer, says by the time of Tipu's death, they were probably just a handful of temples in Mysore where puja was actually being conducted. Most of the grants to temples had already been confiscated because he had to raise money to pay the British war indemnity of about 3.5 crores. So oppressive taxation measures, and the first, victim of that were the Hindu temples, whose grants he completely appropriated so that he could pay, the indemnity to the British. So on the basis of all of this, and of course, you could get into the details of how many people. There is copious amount of documentation. How many people killed in Coorg? How many in Mangalore? The Christians and the Hindus, both of them, facing the brunt of this. The Mandya Mayangars, who we are right in the week of Diwali, and it is an intergenerational memory and trauma that they don't celebrate Diwali to this day on the same day that the rest of the country does, because 700
Hmm.
people of their family were actually brutally massacred by Tipu on that very day in 1783. So there are a lot of historical evidences. Of course, there are these other examples you talk about, grants to a few temples, and particularly the Shankaracharya. I think that is what
Correct.
is brought up time and again. Now, in the peak of the Third Anglo-Mysore War, the Pindaris, or the irregulars in the Maratha army, actually invade Mysore, and they destroy and vandalize even the highest seat of Hindu faith, which is the Shankaracharya's mutt in Sringeri. And the Shankaracharya goes on a fast unto death, and he's protesting against this, and that sends shivers and shockwaves back in Pune. And the Peshwa tries to, he's really apologetic. He sends letters saying this is not our regular army. These are the irregulars, and they are the Muslim Pathans in the army who did this, and we would like to, repay for this and rebuild the mutt for you. And a part of it could also be real politic, where to steal a march over his opponent, Tipu says, "Don't
Hmm.
take money from Pune. I will give you money to, rebuild the entire mutt and so on. And in return, you should actually perform penances and austerities and japams for my longevity." At the same time, when he was snatching away the property and the, funds to the Brahmins, hypocritically, he was also asking the Shankaracharya to employ the same Brahmins to pray for his longevity. So that's why I said it's
Hmm.
a huge, array of confusions which and contradictions which don't, fit into a straight jacket of black and white very strictly.
You said not more than once about his discrimination against Brahmins. Historians who defend him or who see him as a sort of hero figure, they talk about how his army was drawn from what today the nomenclature we would use is Dalits, but Shudras at that time, and they talk about this to make the case that look, he was inclusive, right? So it's the same sort of set of facts that are, I guess, interpreted differently. How do you respond to that interpretation?
I don't, I mean, under the Vadiyar rulers, I don't think there were Brahmins who were in the army. So they were always a military class, which was the same.
Right.
It's not as
Right.
if he got new people into the army itself. I would certainly, of course, while I would call him a feudal autocrat, a lot of his measures, particularly when it came to land ownership, and getting peasants, more say in the ownership of their own land, giving them a lot of interest-free loans so that they could grow more. In those measures, I think he was way ahead of his times. In fact, getting the agricultural produce of Mysore to multiply, he had that financial sense to augment the revenues of the kingdom. Also, partly driven by this need that he had to cough up that money to pay to the British after his defeat in 1791, and creating a huge market for Mysorean products, whether it was sandalwood, whether it was silk, Mysore silk, which he hugely patronized, also pearls and other betel nuts, jasmine, all these specialities which are of Mysore and of Karnataka, to find international markets for them, be it in Muscat, in Oman, in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, and also embassies that he sent to foreign countries. So in these things, I think he was certainly, way ahead of his times. Like very few other contemporaries of his could probably think beyond their own kingdom, whereas this man was actually thinking quite international. But as I said, Barkha, I think it's a very, very tenuous balance as to how your social report card also sits with all these supposedly, egalitarian, forward-looking kind of measures. And in that, there are no two views. I think people who try to undermine or talk this down, saying this never happened, this is all exaggeration, I think being extremely, extremely ingenious with history and historical facts.
So I think the argument that you're making is that he wasn't just driven by political ambition or the conquering energy that perhaps any marauder of any faith would come with, but that he was actually, he had this sense of the believer and the non-believer, the believer and the quote-unquote the kafir. But at the same time, he sought kind of blessings for himself, even from people of different faiths.
Yes, true. And I think in the uncertainty that his life was put, a stormy rules. Just 17 years he ruled, 1782 to 1799. Probably there was not a single day that didn't go without a war or some kind of conflict somewhere. So in the face of so much uncertainty, this man turned to so much of superstition, divination mechanisms, relying hugely on astrology. Both Hindu and Muslim astrologers. In fact, even on the last day of his life, on 4th of May, in a very poignant end that he has, even that morning, he's consulting astrologers saying, when should I set out for fight? What is the route that my Mars is taking in which axis? All of this he's discussing even on that day. And people are doing japam, someone is doing something else in a mosque and so on, praying for him. But when you talk about the religious bigotry, now, Hyder, as I said, was no less cruel. I mean, when it came to war and, the kind of atrocities, we can say that kingship is closely aligned with violence, which is no doubt of that era, which was a different era. But Hyder, at least when it came within the kingdom, there's no overt messaging about the faith coming in anywhere. In the case of Tipu Sultan, while there is an element of conquest and vanquishing the conquered, there is a double whammy here which comes with also targeting on the basis of identity, on the basis of a person's faith or religion. So in fact,
and how do you reconcile that with, how do you reconcile the destruction of temples with the grants to temples? Like, how do you reconcile both of these facts?
So the grants also, I mean, many of them, I've actually listed several grants that he made. Many of them, actually, if you investigate, they were on the obverse of a silver cup or something, which was given to the Srikantha temple, Srikanteshwara temple in Nanjangud. The inscription is of someone else who's made the same grant earlier. So he probably
Hmm.
confiscated it and then redonated
Hmm.
it back to many
Hmm.
temples. So that way, many of these get busted. Several of these, grants were actually made during Haidar's rule, not Tipu's rule. But they, since he just continued it, or he didn't know that this was going on, the Guruvayur temple in Kerala. Now, the priest there got to know that he's going to demolish the deity, and so in stealth they take it away, and it is kept in another place called Ambalapula, and that place is worshipped even to this day, because that place gave shelter temporarily to the deity. Now there are records that there are grants that came from Tipu to this temple. We can't reconcile that. On the one hand, you wanted to destroy the idol, and the other hand, you're giving
Correct.
grants. Then you investigate that these were actually at the behest of Haidar, which either he overlooked, or there was some intermediary. There was a guy called Hydros Putti in Kerala, in Guruvayur, who shielded this knowledge from the Sultan and continued the grant. So a lot of local subversion also that way, which ensured that he did not take action. But I wanted to make one point.
Hmm.
When we talk of a lot of scholars who say the British demonized him and made him appear like this bigot and a hated object. The British actually have no such accounts of Hyder Ali. In fact, many of them,
Hmm.
including Wilkes and Bowring and all these people from the colonial times, and my Hindu historians of Mysore of the early 20th century, Hayavardhan Rao and others, they say though he was so cruel and all of that, people had a certain deal of respect for him, either grudgingly or whatever, because they knew that his
Hmm.
disposition may be that of a cruel monarch, but he was not personally vindictive to many of them. And in fact, the British would have had a bigger axe to grind against Hyder, because he defeated them black and blue. In the first Anglo-Mysore War, the second Anglo-Mysore War, he goes to the very gates of Madras, and the British could have actually been wiped out of India, had he been a little more tactful, and his allies, the other Indian players, supported him. So it would actually help the British to demonize Hyder more than to demonize
Yeah.
a Tipu who actually never won a single war against the British, mind you. The third and the fourth Anglo-Mysore War that he fought, independently without the shadow of his father, he was horribly defeated, and the last one he was killed. So a killed person, to demonize him for what joy? They would ideally do that to someone who, actually embarrassed and defeated them multiple times.
But Vikram, talking about the British, I mean, certainly Tipu Sultan was killed by the British, right? He died fighting the
Yeah,
British.
yeah,
Um, and you, of course, have told the tale of how even in those last moments he was betrayed uh, by his own people. He could not actually use the safe passage that he thought was available to him. That passage was blocked, and so he died in that sense, a sad, sort of a sad, defeated king, but fighting the British. Now, even this has been contested. Like, in this case, so you have the Congress and the left, and parties like Asaduddin Owaisi's party celebrating Tipu Sultan, and on the other side, and we've seen this in every election season, you have the right wing basically erasing how Tipu Sultan died. And I think there's enough evidence to show how he was killed.
yeah. So, in fact, right in the prologue, I debunk both sides. If the Congress and their
Yeah.
allied parties talk about him in glowing terms, I've equally criticized what the BJP did in the run up to the 2023 elections. You had this whole myth created of this Gowda chieftains called Uri Gowda and Nanjay Gowda, who they claimed were the ones who killed Tipu and not the British.
And these people existed, or they never existed even.
No, no, I don't think it's a complete myth. Not a single historian, British or Mysore, for 200 years ever got to know that there was someone like this. And the
Hmm.
BJP somehow managed to, do such
Yeah.
high-end research and get
Yeah.
this thing out, which is why, Barkha, I think when people like this or characters like this of the past or topics like this become such a hot potato political football, I think the responsibility lies on the slender shoulders of historians like me to kind of put things in a perspective, that there are multiple opinions and views to someone like this, and neither of them are doing service to the legacy or the truth of a person as polarizing as Tipu Sultan.
So how did he die? Tell us about that. I know you write about it in your book, but give us a sense. Like, we've spoken a little bit about it. He had this passage he was supposed to escape from, and that he was betrayed. He was
Yes.
betrayed by his own. And then he said, okay, if I'm betrayed, I'll go back and I'll fight. And he died and he was killed.
Yeah, it was a losing battle, and he knew that he was trying to escape from various routes. As you said, that one passage was actually blocked by Mir
Yeah.
Sadiq, one of his most trusted ministers, who turned against him. So it was not only the Hindus. So the Purnaya was also supposedly a traitor, but even the Muslims, who the last few years of his life, even a very, very favorable biographer like Dennis Forrest calls Tipu being completely overtaken by mental blindness. You see it like a Greek
Hmm.
tragedy unfolding scene by scene, where he's so shocked and paranoid after the loss of the Third Anglo-Mysore War. He was sleeping in a hammock that was suspended from the ceiling, and this hammock was in such a way that it could not be seen from outside. So it's suspended midair, so that anytime there is a secret attack, he could jump off. The hammock is actually fully loaded with pistols and swords. So you
Hmm.
can imagine the amount of paranoia that one could have had to be in such a circumstance. And so in the Fourth Mysore War, when Richard Wellesley sends his troops and the Allied forces encircle Srirangapatna, there's lots of back and forth. He tries to wriggle out, doesn't succeed. Then these people ask him to escape, which is not a bad thing. His father had done a similar thing,
Hmm.
regroup, and then come back and live on for another day and fight. He tries that. In fact, there are evidences of how he asked his family members and some treasures and other things to be pushed through that passage. But as you said, that was locked, sealed from him. And then he's literally left in the open, and he has so little to do other than keep fighting till the last that he can. And the British soldiers who rush into the fort of Srirangapatna on that fateful day, they don't even recognize that this is the Sultan of Mysore. They just see this man who was
Hmm.
trying to kill as many people as possible. Their attention is caught by the rich jewels and a brooch that he's wearing. And to get that, they actually strike at him and he falls. And by the time the day ends and the sun sets over a literal, fortress of hell that Srirangapatna has become that day, putrid bodies lying everywhere,
Hmm.
vultures, encircling the place. The family is also aghast. They don't know where he has gone. The British are scared. They don't know if he's actually, escaped or he's hiding in the Zenana. And so they try to search the
Hmm.
palace. They don't find him. They finally, a search party goes. And that is where, amidst a heap of dead bodies, they find, his hand clasping the sword. And they, identify him and bring him out and give him a ceremonial funeral. So it was a Shakespearean tragedy, a Greek tragedy that was, unraveling itself chapter by chapter. And sometimes you feel sad for the man, but at other times, if you look at it objectively, he brought this misery on himself
Hmm.
due to his lack of foresight, due to his hubris, due to his unbridled arrogance, megalomania, this bloated self-image about yourself, where you think you are larger than life. Wilkes talks of instances where he was blasphemous enough to compare himself to the holy prophet, and sometimes even higher than him. So when that kind of madness gets into anybody's head, it's very difficult to survive and prosper.
Those who celebrate him call him a symbol of resistance against the British. Now, you of course don't dispute the fact that he died fighting the British, um, but there are also other narratives that talk about him trying to stitch an alliance with Napoleon against the British, him using modern weaponry, in these battles. Are there shades of gray here? Would you call him a religious bigot who was a symbol of resistance against the British? Are both of these facts,
Both of these are
facts?
facts. Of course, that he was a symbol of resistance against the British is undoubted. And the very fact that it took the British 40 years to conquer Mysore, under both
Hmm.
father and son, four wars to vanquish it. And that was the last obstacle in the setting up of the British Raj in India. And Richard Wellesley is called the father of the British Empire because he was the one who managed this. Undoubtedly a symbol of resistance and a bigot, both of it. But was he a freedom fighter? Because if not for the British having won the war, if the French had won,
Hmm.
the French were no less colonial. It took us, longer time to redeem Pondicherry from French control than the rest of India. So we in Karnataka may have been speaking French today rather than Kannada. And the fact that you're inviting foreign powers to invade India. His letters to Zaman Shah. So on the one hand, he's talking to the
Hmm.
French and using their hatred and rivalry with the British to his advantage, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do in war. Enemy is your friend and all of that. But to the Muslim world, to the larger Ummah, he was also projecting himself as the most ideal Muslim ruler of India, saying the Mughal empire has collapsed and he's a powerless puppet in the hands of infidels, the Marathas and others. And I am the only true Muslim. See, I have killed so many people, I have burnt so many temples down and churches down, and I'm establishing the true faith. So come and help me. So in his letters to Zaman Shah, the Afghan Durrani ruler of Afghanistan, there's a clear, plan of action saying for 2 years, let us have this nationwide, war where the first year you defeat all of North India, will depose the Mughal, take over Delhi, and then in the second year, let's liberate southern India from the Kafir rule, and then let both of us divide the entire India between ourselves as an Islamic caliphate. And the same, measure goes to the Shah of Persia, to the Turkey Sultan. So where religious sentiments could be, invoked, he did that too, to actually talk of establishing a pan-Islamist, very much influenced by the emerging Wahhabi ideology, which started gaining ground in the Middle East. So to establish that pure, austere Islamic rule in not only Mysore but the whole of India. I don't know in those circumstances how you could call him a freedom fighter. That he was a symbol of resistance against the British. No one can have two views on that. He may have lost against them, but he was a symbol. But that's what Barkha, I think, post-independence, the popular narrative is anyone who fought against the British is a hero, irrespective of what all else you might have done in your, in your rule. So the popular media too, in cinema, it's always the British who's the bad guy, the Indian subaltern who's fighting against him is the hero or the heroine. That's how our Lagan and everything is showcased that way. I think he falls in that compartment, and that is why this exalted image for him, and calling him India's first freedom fighter, which I feel is stretching it a bit too much.
So, okay, so you make the distinction between being a freedom fighter and being anti-British, and I think the argument you're making is he was ready to engage with other imperialist forces to protect his own kingdom. But given that you do agree that he did resist the British, and given that the British are the ones who colonized India, when governments like the Siddaramaiah government in the past, and they're back in power in Karnataka, have, for example, featured Tipu Sultan in the tableau, if you remember. That's how a lot of this debate started. There's a big argument over how he should be commemorated, whether he should be commemorated. Where do you weigh in on that debate?
See, I generally don't wade into the murky world of politics. I like to stay far away. They can do what they wish to do.
Yes.
And the theater of the absurd will continue when it comes to
Correct.
Indian politics, as you and I have often discussed.
Correct.
I really don't mind if, a group of people, individuals, get together and form a Tipu Sultan fan club or something, and they commemorate whatever they do, his birth anniversary. It's a free country. Anyone can do anything. But when an elected government, on taxpayers' money, actually commemorates someone whose, atrocities, cruelties is not some frozen episode of the past. You have in the intergenerational trauma, living traditions, oral traditions, which are, present even to this day. When Tipu Jayanti was ordered in 2015, forget what the BJP did. It would have done what it was expected to do. But you had citizen groups, the Christians of Mangalore, the Nayars in Kerala, the Kodava National Council, in Coorg. All these people who had nothing to do with an anti-Congress policy or a pro-BJP policy, they also jumped into the field saying, please don't valorize and celebrate someone like this, because our ancestors have suffered immensely under him. So the Christians obviously had nothing common with the Sangh Parivar's ideology. Otherwise, they're all the time on the other side of the fence with them. So, and the Mandya Mayangars, whom I said, if a community in your own state is still having those memories and is not celebrating a festival, every year on 12th of December, the Kodavas have, a commemoration called Martyrs' Day, where on 12th of December 1785, Tipu invited, several of the Kodava chieftains in thousands with a false sense of hope that we were doing a rapprochement and we're actually coming together. And once they came there, they were all unarmed. And by stealth, there was a huge, huge massacre at this place called Devatiparam. And to this day, people assemble there. In fact, just this morning in the newspaper, I read something about how they plan to commemorate this day in the following month in December. So when that happens, it is a responsibility of a democratically elected government to also go by the wishes of your people. You commemorate sovereigns. Now, in 1947, when we turned our backs on princely states and we decided to become a democratic republic, I think that was done with some sense in mind that what kind of virtues and you want to valorize and celebrate in your kings before. So if your sovereign is someone who did something for the larger benefit and welfare of the people, say Ahilyabai Holkar or someone like that, who's a positive influence, which is visible even to this day. If a government celebrates that, it is still okay. But to commemorate this on taxpayers' money, especially when he has such a troubled report card, and with the clear, very perverse intention that you're doing this to cultivate a vote bank, which is based on communal grounds, I think that is certainly, very, very, it's a travesty.
Let me end by asking you to tell me one thing that Tipu Sultan is credited for that is incorrect, and one thing he is criticized for that is also incorrect.
Credited, I think we discussed this about his whole idea that it's going to be a freedom fight and liberating India and so on.
Right.
Which I don't think there was that kind of view, considering constantly, even to Louis XVI in France, he sends emissaries. He sends emissaries to the Isle of France in Mauritius, again with the idea of France invading India and it becoming a French colony. So this whole freedom fight is something that I think is a little far-fetched. The criticized part is very tough because a lot of what he's criticized, I've actually tried to, I've shown that things are true, except these crazy stories like that Uri Goda and all those things, which, again, done with the same perverse intention. If the one group is trying to cultivate the Muslim vote bank, you want the Wakaliga vote bank against it in South Karnataka. So I think that is something that, I discovered is completely false, and there is no historical evidence or proof of this.
Well, congratulations for yet another tome. It's a big book on Tipu Sultan, both in volume, weight, and impact. But I think I urge all members of our audience who want to understand Tipu Sultan beyond the rhetorical claims of politicians to do please read Dr. Vikram Sampath's book. Vikram, always a pleasure. Thank you. Congratulations and take care.
Thank you, Barkha. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
That was...
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Voter's Story. And